course, we all here in this room live in Biosphere 1. I also lived in Biosphere 2. So Biosphere 2 was essentially a 3-acre, entirely sealed miniature world that I lived in for 2 years and 20 minutes. And over the top, it was sealed with steel and glass. Underneath, it was sealed with a pan of steel, essentially entirely sealed. So we had our own miniature rainforest, a private beach with a coral reef. We had a savanna, a marsh, a desert. We had our own half-acre farm that we had to grow everything. And of course, we had our human habitat where we lived. Back in the mid-'80s, when we were designing Biosphere 2, we had to ask ourselves some pretty basic questions. I mean, what is a biosphere? Back then, yes, I guess we all know now that it's essentially the sphere of life around the Earth, right? Well, you had to get a little bit more specific than that if you're going to build one. And so, we decided that what it really is that it is entirely materially closed, that is, nothing goes in or out at all, no material, and energetically open, which is essentially what planet Earth is. And over the ensuing few years, there was great sagas about designing Biosphere 2, but by 1991, we finally had this thing built, and it was time for us to go in and give it a go. We needed to know, is life this malleable? Can you take this biosphere that has evolved on a planetary scale and jam it into a little bottle, and will it survive? Big questions. And we wanted to know this both for being able to go somewhere else in the universe. If we were going to go to Mars, for instance, would we take a biosphere with us to live in it? We also wanted to know so that we could understand more about the Earth that we all live in. Well, in 1991, it was finally time for us to go in and try out this baby. Let's take it on a maiden voyage. Will it work, or will something happen that we can't understand and we can't fix, thereby negating the concept of man-made biospheres? So 8 of us went in, 4 men and 4 women. So on the top, we had this beautiful rainforest and an ocean. And then underneath, we had all this technosphere, we called it, which is where all the pumps and the valves and the water tanks and the air handlers and all of that. One of the Biospherians called it Garden of Eden on top of an aircraft carrier. And then we also had the human habitat, of course, with the laboratories and all of that. This is the agriculture. It was essentially an organic farm. The day I walked into Biosphere 2, I was for the first time breathing a completely different atmosphere than everybody else in the world, except 7 other people. At that moment, I became part of that biosphere. And I don't mean that in an abstract sense. I mean it rather literally. When I breathed out, my CO2 fed the sweet potatoes that I was growing. And we ate an awful lot of sweet potatoes. And those sweet potatoes became part of me. In fact, we ate so many sweet potatoes, I became orange with sweet potato. I literally was eating the same carbon over and over again. When it came to our atmosphere, however, it wasn't that much of a joke over the long term, because it turned out that we were losing oxygen, quite a lot of oxygen. And we knew that we were losing CO2, and so we were working like crazy to sequester carbon. Good Lord, we know that term now. We were growing plants like crazy. We were taking their biomass, storing them in the basement, growing plants, going around and around and around, trying to take all of that carbon out of the atmosphere. We were trying to stop carbon from going into the atmosphere. We stopped irrigating our soil as much as we could. We stopped tilling so that we could prevent greenhouse gases from going into the air. But our oxygen was going down faster than our CO2 was going up, which was quite unexpected, because we had seen them going in tandem in the test module. And it was like playing atomic hide-and-seek. We had lost 7 tons of oxygen, and we had no clue where it was. And I tell you, when you lose a lot of oxygen, and our oxygen went down quite far, it went from 21% down to 14.2%, my goodness, do you feel dreadful. I mean, we were dragging ourselves around the biosphere, and we had sleep apnea at night, so you'd wake up gasping with breath, because that's your blood chemistry's changed, and that you literally do that. You stop breathing, and then you take a breath, and it wakes you up, and it's very irritating. And everybody outside thought we were dying. I mean, the media was making it sound like we were dying, and I had to call up my mother every other day saying, "No, Mum, it's fine, we're not dead, we're fine. And the doctor was, in fact, checking us to make sure we were, in fact, fine. But, in fact, he was the person that was most susceptible to the oxygen. And one day, he couldn't add up a line of figures, and it was time for us to put oxygen in. And you might think, well, boy, your life support system was failing you. Wasn't that dreadful? Yes. In a sense, it was terrifying, except that I knew that I could walk out the airlock door at any time if it really got bad. Though who was going to say, I can't take it anymore? Not me, that was for sure. But on the other hand, it was the scientific gold of the project, because we could really crank this baby up as a scientific tool and see if we could, in fact, find where those 7 tons of oxygen had gone. And we did indeed find it, and we found it in the concrete. Essentially, it had done something very simple. We had put too much carbon in the soil in the form of compost. It broke down, it took oxygen out of the air, put CO2 into the air, and it went into the concrete. Pretty straightforward, really. Now, we may not all have another biosphere that we can run to and compare it to this biosphere, but we can look at the world and try to understand where we are in its context, and how we choose to interact with it. And if you lose where you are in your biosphere, or are perhaps having difficulty connecting with where you are in the biosphere, I would say to you, take a deep breath. And as you breathe, think about what is in your breath. There perhaps is the CO2 from the person sitting next door to you. Maybe there's a little bit of oxygen from some algae on the beach not far from here. It also connects us in time. There may be some carbon in your breath from the dinosaurs. There could also be carbon that you are exhaling now that will be in the breath of your great-great-great-grandchildren. Thank you.